Daniel is one of those people who sparks a unique sense of admiration. Picture someone who, even in a hostile environment, managed to stand out for their wisdom, courage, and unwavering faith. He lived during a time when the people of Israel were exiled in Babylon, a land full of cultural, religious, and political challenges. But Daniel wasn't just another exile. He was someone who carried the deep conviction that God had a greater purpose for his life. Isn't that inspiring? Thinking that, even in the face of so much adversity, someone can maintain their integrity and shine like a light in the darkness. How many times have we felt out of place and thought, how can I make a difference here? Even Daniel's name tells a story. It means, God is my judge, and this truth echoed in everything he did. From a young age, he was recognized as someone special. Imagine being taken from your homeland, far from everything familiar, and still staying true to who you are. That takes strength, not just physical, but spiritual. And you know what's amazing? Daniel didn't just survive in such a hostile environment, he thrived. Daniel's life is a masterclass in resilience. In Babylon, he was placed in an environment that tried to reshape him into the mold of a culture completely different from his own. But even under pressure, he chose to hold on to what was eternal, his faith in God. That makes us think about how much we're influenced by our surroundings and to what extent we're willing to stand firm in our beliefs. Think about the small, everyday choices that shape your character. If Daniel had compromised on even one of those, his story would have been entirely different. One of Daniel's first bold decisions was refusing to eat the king's delicacies. That might sound like a small thing, but for him it was a matter of principle. He knew it could jeopardize his devotion to God. What does that teach us? Sometimes we have to give up what seems appealing or easy for the sake of something greater. Maybe you've faced situations where you had to say no, even when everything around you said yes. It's tough, but it's also incredibly freeing. Daniel wasn't alone on his journey. He had friends like Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah who shared his faith and values. That reminds us how important it is to surround ourselves with people who encourage and strengthen us. Who are those people in your life? If you haven't found them yet, start looking. A strong community makes all the difference. Another fascinating thing about Daniel is that he didn't stand out just for his spirituality, but also for his wisdom and intellect. He was someone who knew how to combine faith and reason. Two things we often think don't go together, but in reality they complement each other. Have you ever thought about how you can use your natural talents as a way to glorify God and make an impact on those around you? Courage was another defining trait of Daniel. Even knowing that his faith could put him in danger, he never hid it. That raises a tough question. How willing are we to stand up for what we believe in? In a world where we're constantly pressured to conform, courage has become a rare virtue. But it's that same courage that sets us apart. Daniel was also someone who trusted God's plan completely, even when he didn't understand the details. It's easy to trust when everything's going well, but what about when life falls apart? He shows us that true trust is the kind that stands firm, even when the answers aren't clear. Can you think of areas in your life where you need to trust more and question less? His life is a crystal-clear example of how God can use ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Daniel didn't have superpowers, but he had something even more valuable, faith and a willingness to obey. And honestly, that's all we need to be used by God. Have you ever stopped to think about the potential inside you, just waiting to be activated? Daniel's story is a powerful introduction to understanding how faithfulness to God can transform lives. Every choice, every action points to something greater. And what's even more fascinating is that his life isn't just an inspiration, it's a challenge. It makes us look at our own lives and ask, Are we living with the same integrity and purpose? It's a journey that keeps going, just like the lessons he left behind, leading us right to the next captivating aspect, the meaning of the name he carried. The name Daniel holds a depth that goes way beyond just being a label. It means God is my judge, a statement that powerfully echoes throughout the story of his life. Isn't it fascinating how our names can sometimes reflect who we are or what we're destined to be? For Daniel, it became a constant reminder that he lived under God's watchful and just eyes. This awareness shaped his decisions and his stance when faced with challenges. After all, knowing there's a higher judgment can help us stay focused, even in situations that seem to pull us away from what's right. Think about how the meaning of a name can impact someone. For Daniel, that connection with God was like an anchor, something that kept him grounded while living in a culture that didn't share his faith. The phrase, "God is my judge," wasn't just some theological concept for him. It was a practical truth guiding his actions. That makes us think, what's the anchor that keeps us on the right path in our own lives? Is there something that reminds us to live with purpose and integrity even when no one's watching? Daniel's name didn't just influence his actions, it also made a bold statement to those around him. In a society where names often honored Babylonian gods, his name was a testament to his exclusive loyalty to God. That brings up an interesting question. How do we show our beliefs and values to the world? Are our actions and words consistent with who we say we are? Like Daniel, maybe it's time to reflect on what we're communicating to the world through our identity. In Babylon, where the names and identities of exiled youths were often changed to conform to local customs, the meaning of Daniel's name becomes even more impactful. It teaches us that even when the world tries to reshape us to fit its expectations, we can choose to stay true to who we really are. It challenges us to resist external pressures and remember that our true identity is rooted in something far more solid, in God. The notion that God is my judge also brings a sense of freedom. If we know that God, not people, is the one who judges us, we can live without the fear of others' opinions. How many times do we hold back from making an important decision or doing what we know is right because we're afraid of being judged? Daniel shows us that living with that kind of confidence is possible, and it's that freedom that allows us to reach levels of excellence we might not have thought possible. Daniel also shows us that this awareness of divine judgment isn't something to fear, but something to embrace. He understood that God's judgment was fair and that his mercy was always present. That leads us to an essential point. Trusting God isn't about fear, it's about love and reverence. When we understand that God sees us with grace, we're more motivated to live lives that honor him. Imagine how that can transform our daily decisions, from our work to our relationships. It's interesting to note how Daniel's name resonated in the moments when he showed courage and faithfulness. Every time he chose to obey God, even in the face of dangerous consequences, he was, in practice, affirming the meaning of his name. That inspires us to live in a way that reflects our own values. How can you affirm what you believe through your daily choices? Maybe it's something simple, like showing kindness to a stranger or making an ethical decision at work. Beyond that, the meaning of Daniel's name also points to the idea of personal responsibility. If God is our judge, then we're accountable for our actions, no matter the circumstances. That doesn't mean we have to be perfect. It's about constantly being aware that our choices matter. Think about how that can motivate us to be more intentional in everything we do. It could be as simple as setting aside time for prayer or finding ways to help those around us. At the same time, this responsibility comes with the assurance that we're not alone. The same God who is our judge is also our helper. Daniel trusted this truth, and it gave him the strength to face enormous challenges with unshakable faith. How often do we forget that God is present, ready to give us strength and wisdom? The meaning of Daniel's name reminds us that we're never left to fend for ourselves, no matter how tough the road gets. So, Daniel's name doesn't just describe who he was, it challenges us to reflect on our own journey. Are we living in a way that our names, our identities, reflect God's truth? That's a question that can guide us as we dive deeper into Daniel's story, like his journey in Babylon, where he showed, through concrete actions, what it means to live under God's just and loving judgment. Imagine being ripped away from your homeland, from everything you know and love, and taken to a completely foreign place. That's exactly what happened to Daniel and other noble young men from Israel. They were forcibly taken to Babylon, one of the most powerful empires of the time. And don't be fooled. This wasn't just a change of scenery, it was a calculated attempt to erase their identities and replace them with a completely different culture. But instead of giving in, Daniel chose to use this experience as an opportunity to show his faithfulness to God. How many times do we find ourselves in situations where everything around us tries to shape us? Just like Daniel, we can choose to stay true to who we are. In Babylon, Daniel and his companions weren't thrown into prison cells or forced into hard labor. They were chosen for something much more subtle, yet equally challenging, an intensive education in Babylonian culture, language, and customs. The goal was clear: to transform these young Israelites into loyal servants of King Nebuchadnezzar. This strategy is a reminder of how the world often tries to mold us to fit its standards. The real question is, how do we resist that without losing who we truly are? One of the most striking aspects of this story is how Daniel and his friends found ways to thrive in a system designed to reshape them. They absorbed everything Babylonian education had to offer, from astronomy to literature, but they never let it compromise their faith. That teaches us that we don't have to reject learning or progress, but we should use them in a way that honors God. Think about how you can apply this in your own life, maybe by picking up new skills or pursuing education, but always with a purpose rooted in your values. Daniel's first big test in this environment came in the form of a meal. It might seem like a small thing, but Daniel's refusal to eat the king's food and drink his wine was an act of resistance with deep spiritual implications. He knew that the food was likely dedicated to pagan gods. It's amazing how small decisions can reveal so much about our character. What choices are you making daily that reflect your faithfulness to God or to what you believe is right? What's even more fascinating is how Daniel handled this situation. He didn't cause a scene or openly rebel. Instead, he politely asked permission to follow a different diet of vegetables and water. He showed wisdom and humility, traits that earned him the trust of his supervisors. This teaches us that it's not just what we do that matters, but how we do it. If you're facing a tough situation, how can you handle it with grace and intelligence like Daniel did? The result of this decision was nothing short of extraordinary. After a trial period, Daniel and his friends were healthier and looked better than all the other young men eating the king's food. This wasn't just about nutrition, it was a testament to God's care and provision. How often do we underestimate the power of faith-driven decisions? It could be as simple as dedicating time to prayer or reading the Bible, yet these small acts can lead to outcomes far beyond what we imagine. Daniel and his friends also show us the importance of community. They face these challenges together, supporting one another. This reminds us that we don't have to walk alone. Having people by our side who share our values and beliefs is priceless. Who's walking alongside you on your journey? Maybe it's time to strengthen those connections, or even seek out new ones that can help you grow spiritually and emotionally. The education Daniel received in Babylon was advanced but deeply rooted in a pagan worldview. Even so, he managed to absorb the knowledge without compromising his faith. This shows us that we can be immersed in environments that don't align with our worldview and still remain faithful. The key is knowing how to filter what's useful and discard what's harmful. How can you apply that kind of discernment in your own life, whether at work, school, or anywhere else? In the end, Daniel didn't just survive the Babylonian system, he thrived within it. His wisdom and skills earned him recognition, opening doors for even greater influence. That reminds us that sometimes God uses the toughest situations to position us exactly where He wants us to be. Think about your own circumstances. Is there something that feels like a challenge but might actually be an opportunity in disguise? Daniel's time of captivity and education in Babylon wasn't just a test of endurance. It was a lesson in how trusting God can turn even the hardest situations into platforms for His glory. And this is only part of the story. What comes next reveals even more about Daniel's character and the gifts God entrusted to him, especially his incredible ability to interpret dreams and visions. From an early age, Daniel stood out for his wisdom and discernment, but there was something about him that went beyond human understanding. God gave Daniel extraordinary gifts, like the ability to interpret dreams and visions. These weren't just talents, they were clear manifestations of God's power working through him. Think about it. Have you ever felt called to do something that seemed way beyond your natural abilities? Just like Daniel, God can use even our limitations to show His greatness. The ability to interpret dreams and visions was rare, especially in a place like Babylon, where such phenomena were highly valued. But Daniel always made it clear that God was the source of his wisdom. He never bragged about his gifts, but used them to glorify God and fulfill a greater purpose. That kind of humility is something we can all learn from. How often do we forget to acknowledge that our talents and achievements are gifts from God? More importantly, how can we use them to benefit others? One of the most famous examples of Daniel using his gift was when he interpreted King Nebuchadnezzar's dream. The king had a disturbing vision of a massive statue made of different materials, and none of his advisors could explain it. But Daniel prayed to God for wisdom and was given the interpretation. He revealed that the dream symbolized the future of kingdoms and God's sovereignty over history. This moment not only highlighted the importance of depending on God, but also showed how our gifts can deeply impact others' lives. It's interesting to note that Daniel didn't just receive these gifts, he nurtured them. He had a disciplined prayer life and unwavering faith, which prepared him for pivotal moments. This teaches us that divine gifts, while freely given by God, also require responsibility and dedication. How can you cultivate the gifts God has placed in your life? Maybe it's time to invest in prayer, study, or practices that enhance your skills so you can use them more effectively. Another powerful episode was the interpretation of the writing on the wall during King Belshazzar's reign. That tense, mysterious moment reminds us that God gives specific gifts for specific situations. Daniel read the message written by a supernatural hand and explained it as a divine warning to the king. Once again, he pointed to God as the source of the revelation. This challenges us to trust that God will equip us when we need it most, as long as we're willing to be used by Him. What's fascinating about Daniel's gifts is how they opened doors for him to influence even the most powerful kings in Babylon. His gifts didn't spare him from challenges, but they positioned him strategically. This shows us that the gifts God gives aren't just for our personal benefit, they're meant to impact those around us. Have you thought about how your talents could serve a bigger purpose, even in tough environments? Daniel's life also reminds us that divine gifts don't guarantee a smooth ride. In fact, they often lead to tests and trials. Daniel faced opposition, persecution, and even the threat of death, yet he never wavered in his faith or used his gifts for selfish gain. This is a reminder that gifts come with responsibility. Are we willing to use them for good, even when it's hard? One key takeaway is the connection between Daniel's gifts and his relationship with God. He never used them independently, but always sought divine guidance. This makes us reflect on how we're using our own gifts. Are we letting God lead, or are we trying to go it alone? Like Daniel, we can benefit from maintaining a constant connection with God, the source of all wisdom and discernment. Daniel's gifts also had a profound impact on the people around him. His interpretations weren't just revelations, they brought hope, guidance, and even warnings that could save lives. Similarly, the gifts God gives us have the potential to bless others. How can you use your abilities to help those around you? Maybe it's as simple as offering advice, or as significant as leading during a crisis. Daniel's story shows us that divine gifts aren't limited by human circumstances. He was in captivity, in a foreign land, but that didn't stop God from using him in extraordinary ways. And that's the beauty of God's gifts. They transcend human barriers and reveal his power. But Daniel's story doesn't end here. His experiences with divine gifts lead us directly to one of the most impactful episodes of his life, the fiery furnace and the unwavering faith of his companions. The story of the fiery furnace is one of the most iconic moments in the book of Daniel, a powerful testament to God's faithfulness and the courage of his servants. Picture this: 3 young men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, better known by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, boldly refusing to bow down to the massive golden statue King Nebuchadnezzar had erected. Their refusal wasn't just an act of rebellion. It was a declaration of faith. They knew that God alone was worthy of worship, even if that conviction cost them their lives. It's incredible how these young men displayed such unshakable courage in the face of a very real threat. Furious at their defiance, the king ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, yet they stood firm. That makes you wonder, how do we respond when we're pressured to compromise our values? Their story challenges us to hold our ground, even when everything around us seems to push us in the opposite direction. Their dialogue with the king is one of the most moving parts of the story. With confidence, they said, "If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods." That statement is powerful because it shows not just faith in God's power, but also acceptance of his sovereignty. They were willing to trust God, no matter the outcome. How often do we hesitate to step out in faith because we're waiting for guarantees? Nebuchadnezzar, consumed with rage, ordered the 3 men to be bound and thrown into the furnace. The flames were so intense that the soldiers carrying out the order were killed. But what happened next was nothing short of miraculous. Inside the furnace, the young men weren't just alive, they were walking unharmed in the fire. Even more astonishing, there was a 4th figure with them, described as looking like a son of the gods. This figure is widely understood to be a divine presence, possibly Christ himself. This moment reminds us that even in our most desperate situations, God is right there with us. He doesn't just watch from a distance, he walks with us through the fire. It doesn't mean we'll never face hardships, but it does mean we're never alone. Think about a tough time in your life. Did you sense God's presence? Maybe it's worth reflecting on how he has sustained you even when circumstances felt overwhelming. When Nebuchadnezzar saw this miracle, he was stunned. He called the young men out of the furnace, and to his amazement, they weren't just alive. They didn't even smell like smoke. That small detail shows the completeness of God's deliverance. He doesn't just rescue us, He restores what seemed lost. Is there something in your life that feels destroyed? The story of the furnace gives us hope that God can fully restore it. The courage of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also teaches us about the ripple effect of faithfulness. Because of their bravery, Nebuchadnezzar was compelled to acknowledge the power of Israel's God. He declared, "There is no other God who can save in this way." This shows that our faithful choices can have an impact far beyond ourselves. Who knows, your faithfulness in a difficult situation might inspire someone else to see God in a new way. This story also serves as a lesson about idolatry. The golden statue represented more than just a physical object. It symbolized Babylon's values and belief systems. These three young men show us that resisting idolatry takes courage, especially when it's deeply ingrained in the culture around us. What does that mean for us today? We might not face golden statues, but we're still challenged not to bow down to values that contradict our faith. One key detail in the story is that the young men didn't know whether they'd be saved or not, but they trusted God anyway. That teaches us something profound about faith. It's not a guarantee that everything will go our way, but a trust that God is in control, no matter the outcome. How can you practice deeper trust in God in your everyday situations? The story of the fiery furnace isn't just about physical deliverance. It's a powerful message about God's faithfulness and the courage to stay true to Him. And this is just the beginning of the inspiring accounts in the book of Daniel. There are even more miracles and lessons to explore, like the story of Daniel in the lion's den, which reveals yet another dimension of God's power and care. The story of Daniel in the lion's den is one of the most well-known in the Bible, a true example of unwavering faith and divine protection. Picture the tension of being surrounded by hungry lions, knowing any move could be your last. This happened because Daniel refused to abandon his daily practice of prayer, even when faced with a decree that banned any petitions not directed to King Darius. His loyalty to God was greater than his fear of human consequences. The context of this story is crucial. Daniel was one of the top officials in the Medo-Persian Empire and had a spotless reputation. This sparked jealousy among the other leaders, who looked for a way to bring him down. Unable to find any flaws in his character or work, they decided to target his faith. How often do we face criticism or even persecution just for living according to our beliefs? Daniel's life reminds us that being faithful to God is far more valuable than seeking human approval. The conspiracy was cleverly planned. The leaders convinced King Darius to issue a decree banning any prayer or petition to any god or man other than the king for 30 days. It seemed like a foolproof plan, but they underestimated Daniel's resolve. As soon as he heard about the decree, he continued praying 3 times a day, just as he always had, with his windows open toward Jerusalem. That kind of consistency is a powerful testament to how a strong prayer routine can sustain our faith, even in the face of crisis. Daniel's decision to keep praying wasn't impulsive or defiant. It was rooted in his deep commitment to God. He could have hidden or scaled back his religious practices to avoid trouble, but he knew his devotion was more important than any human decree. This challenges us to reflect. Are we willing to prioritize our faith above everything else? And how can we build a consistent prayer life that strengthens us during tough times? When the conspirators caught Daniel praying, they wasted no time reporting him to the king. Darius was devastated. He valued Daniel and recognized his integrity, but he was bound by the laws of the Medes and Persians, which couldn't be changed. This shows how even the most powerful leaders can be trapped by their own systems. Darius tried everything to save Daniel, but in the end he had no choice but to order him thrown into the lion's den. The lion's den was essentially a death sentence, but Daniel remained calm. His confidence wasn't in his ability to escape, but in God's protection. That night, King Darius couldn't sleep, tormented by the decision he'd made. At dawn, he hurried to the den and called out to Daniel, desperately hoping he was still alive. The king's concern reveals how much Daniel's testimony had touched even the most powerful hearts. Daniel's response was astounding. He was alive and unharmed. He explained that God had sent an angel to shut the lions' mouths because he was innocent before God and the king. This miraculous intervention is a powerful reminder that God can deliver us from any situation, no matter how impossible it seems. It encourages us to trust Him in our own challenges, knowing He is faithful to protect and guide us. The impact of this miracle was massive. Darius was deeply moved and ordered that Daniel's accusers, along with their families, be thrown into the den. They weren't as fortunate. The lions attacked them immediately. While this might seem like a harsh punishment, it highlights how God defends those who are faithful to Him and brings justice to those who plot evil. After this event, Darius issued a decree declaring that everyone in the kingdom should fear and revere the God of Daniel. He acknowledged that Daniel's God is the living and eternal God, capable of performing miracles and deliverance. This public recognition of God's sovereignty was a testimony to the entire empire, showing how one person's faithfulness can impact an entire nation. What kind of impact could you make by standing firm in your faith? The story of the lion's den teaches us about courage, faithfulness, and God's protection. But it also gives us a glimpse of something even greater, God's power to intervene in human history and transform even the most hopeless situations. This event ties directly into Daniel's prophetic visions, which reveal God's sovereignty not just over individuals, but over kingdoms and nations. Daniel wasn't just a man of prayer and courage. He was also a prophet whose visions shaped our understanding of history and God's sovereignty. One of his most famous prophecies is the vision of the great statue in King Nebuchadnezzar's. A dream, a symbolic representation of the empires that would rule the world. This statue was made of different materials: gold, silver, bronze, iron, and clay, each representing a specific kingdom. It's a vivid reminder that while human kingdoms may be powerful, they all have limits and are ultimately under God's control. The statue's head of gold symbolized the Babylonian Empire, renowned for its wealth and splendor. But as grand as it was only the beginning of a sequence. The chest and arms of silver represented the Medo-Persian Empire, which would conquer Babylon. These details highlight how God has absolute control over history and knows the end from the beginning. It's a powerful reminder that even when events seem chaotic, there's a greater plan at work. The vision continued with the belly and thighs of bronze, symbolizing the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great, which would expand rapidly but was destined to fade. Next, the legs of iron represented the Roman Empire, famous for its military strength and discipline. Finally, the feet, a mixture of iron and clay, showed a divided kingdom, strong in some ways but fragile in others. This description makes us think about the fragility of human achievements when compared to God's eternal reign. The most striking part of the vision comes at the end. A stone, not cut by human hands, strikes the statue and completely destroys it. This stone represents God's eternal kingdom, one that will never be destroyed or handed over to another people. It's a message of hope, especially for those who feel crushed by the systems and powers of this world. No matter how great human kingdoms may seem, God's kingdom will prevail. Daniel also had a separate vision of 4 beasts, which symbolized the same empires as the statue, but with a different perspective. These beasts were wild and terrifying, reflecting the brutal and unstable nature of human governments. Yet Daniel saw something else: a son of man, receiving dominion, glory, and an eternal kingdom. This prophecy points directly to the coming of Christ. the king who would bring lasting justice and peace. What makes these prophecies even more fascinating is their accuracy. Many scholars agree that Daniel's descriptions of the empires align perfectly with historical events. This not only validates the divine inspiration of his visions, but also encourages us to trust God's promises. If he's already fulfilled so many of his words, we can be confident that he'll continue to keep his promises. These prophecies also help us grasp God's power and sovereignty. He doesn't just sit back and watch history unfold. He orchestrates it. Every kingdom, no matter how powerful, is subject to his will. That's a comforting reminder that nothing is beyond God's control, not even the hardest situations in our own lives. We can trust that he's working everything out for the good of those who love him. Daniel didn't just reveal the future. He showed us how to live in a world full of uncertainties. His visions teach us to hold on to hope and keep the right perspective, even in tough times. When we understand that human kingdoms are temporary and God's kingdom is eternal, we find the strength to face challenges with faith and courage. Have you ever thought about how this perspective could change the way you handle daily struggles? These prophecies also have practical implications for us. They challenge us to ask, which kingdom are we investing in? Are we focused solely on temporary achievements, or are we living for God's eternal kingdom? Daniel's visions remind us that it's worth investing in something that truly lasts. This might mean spending more time in prayer, serving others, or sharing your faith with those who don't yet know God. The grandeur of Daniel's prophecies leads us to a crucial point. God doesn't just rule over empires, he rules over individual hearts. His visions point to something far greater than historical events. They reveal God's divine plan of redemption for all humanity. And as we delve into the leadership lessons from Daniel's life, we see how he exemplified the integrity, humility, and excellence we're all called to follow. Daniel is one of the greatest examples of leadership in history, not just because of his political influence, but because of the way he led with integrity and humility. He held prominent positions in two of the most powerful empires of his time, Babylon and Medo-Persia, and yet he remained faithful to God. This teaches us that true leadership isn't about the title you hold, but the impact you make on the lives of those around you. Have you ever wondered how you can be a leader in your own sphere of influence? One hallmark of Daniel's leadership was his unquestionable integrity. Even his enemies, who tried to find something to accuse him of, couldn't uncover a single flaw in his character or his work. He was honest, faithful, and committed to excellence in everything he did. That kind of leadership is rare and invaluable. What can you do today to strengthen your integrity, whether at work, at home, or in your community? Daniel was also a leader who knew how to listen and seek wisdom beyond himself. He had a habit of consulting God before making big decisions, like when he was called to interpret King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams. This reminds us that to lead well, we need divine guidance. How are you seeking wisdom to lead? Maybe it's time to dedicate more energy to prayer and studying the Bible, asking God for direction in your choices. Another fascinating aspect of Daniel's leadership was how he valued teamwork. He didn't face challenges alone, but leaned on the support of his friends like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Together, they sought God in prayer before Daniel interpreted the king's dream. This shows that a good leader recognizes the importance of a strong community. Who are the people you trust to walk alongside you? Daniel was also incredibly humble. Despite his gifts and achievements, he always gave the glory to God. When he interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he made it clear that the interpretation wasn't from him, but from God. That kind of humility is essential for any leader. It keeps power from going to your head. How can you practice more humility in your daily interactions? One of the greatest leadership lessons we learn from Daniel is the importance of standing out through excellence. He was known not only for his wisdom and discernment, but also for his dedication to his work. He excelled in everything he did, not to gain recognition, but because he saw his work as a reflection of his faith. This challenges us to pursue excellence in all we do, as a testimony of our devotion to God. Daniel also teaches us about moral courage. He was willing to take big risks to stay true to his convictions. Whether it was refusing the king's food, continuing to pray to God despite the threat of death, or delivering hard truths to kings, he never compromised his faith. This challenges us to be leaders who stand firm, even when it's easier to give in to external pressures. Another key point is that Daniel didn't use his position of authority for personal gain, but to serve others. He was known for his honesty and for making fair decisions that benefited the people. This shows us that true leadership is about service, not power. Think about how you can use your influence to help others, whether at home, at work, or in your church. Daniel also demonstrated patience and perseverance. He served in leadership roles for decades, navigating changes in kingdoms, kings, and even cultures. His ability to remain steadfast and consistent over time is a reminder that leadership isn't about isolated moments, but a long-term commitment to excellence and faithfulness. How can you cultivate that kind of consistency in your own life? Finally, Daniel's leadership pointed to something greater than himself. He understood that his position and gifts were opportunities to glorify God and make an impact on the world around him. That sense of purpose is what sets extraordinary leaders apart from ordinary ones. And as we look at his life, we're reminded of the importance of prayer and faith in building strong, meaningful leadership, something he demonstrated daily, leading us directly into the next topic. Daniel's life is a powerful testament to the impact of consistent prayer and faith. From a young age, he demonstrated an unwavering commitment to God that carried him through to his old age. His daily routine of praying 3 times a day, even under the threat of death, shows just how central his connection with God was. This challenges us to reflect: what role does prayer play in our own journey? Are we setting aside enough time to cultivate this vital relationship? Daniel understood that prayer wasn't just a religious ritual, it was a direct connection with God. He didn't pray only in moments of crisis, he maintained a daily discipline that kept him spiritually strong. This reminds us that prayer isn't a last-ditch effort. It's the foundation of a life of faith. Do you have a set time each day to connect with God? If not, maybe it's time to establish a routine that prioritizes this communion. One striking aspect of Daniel's prayers was his gratitude. Even during tough times, like when the decree banned prayer, he knelt down and gave thanks to God. This teaches us that gratitude is an essential part of our spiritual lives. No matter how challenging the situation, there's always something to be thankful for. Start by listing small daily blessings and watch how it transforms your perspective. Along with being grateful, Daniel was specific in his requests. When Nebuchadnezzar had his mysterious dream, Daniel and his friends prayed earnestly for divine wisdom and revelation. This shows us that we can be clear and direct in our prayers, trusting that God hears every word. What do you need today? Ask with faith, knowing that God is able to provide. Daniel's prayers were also marked by intercession. He didn't just pray for himself, but also for his people. In Daniel 9, we see a heartfelt prayer where he confesses Israel's sins and pleads for God's forgiveness. This challenges us to step outside our personal concerns and pray for others. Who in your life needs your prayers today? Take a few minutes to intercede for them. An incredible aspect of Daniel's prayer life was how deeply it aligned with his unwavering faith. He didn't pray with doubt or hesitation, but with the confidence that God could and would respond. This trust was evident when he was thrown into the lion's den. He knew his life was in God's hands, no matter the outcome. That kind of faith is something we can all work toward. How? By reading the Bible, meditating on God's promises, and remembering his past faithfulness. Another notable example is how Daniel sought God in moments of uncertainty. Before interpreting Nebuchadnezzar's dream, he asked for time to pray, showing that his first reaction to a challenge was to seek divine direction. This teaches us not to rush into decisions, but to take time to pray and listen to God. Is there an important decision you need to make? Maybe it's time to seek guidance through prayer before moving forward. Daniel's life also shows us that prayer is a source of strength in times of opposition. When faced with the decree banning prayer, he didn't hide or compromise his faith. Instead, he continued praying with boldness and determination. This reminds us that prayer equips us with the courage to face even the greatest challenges. Think of a tough moment you faced recently. How might prayer have strengthened you during that time? One of the most tangible results of Daniel's prayer life was the way he consistently experienced God's intervention. From interpreting dreams to being delivered from the lion's den, God answered his prayers in remarkable ways. This encourages us to believe that God still hears and responds. Today, maybe you're waiting for a miracle. Keep praying and trusting, because God is working even when you can't see it. Ultimately, Daniel's prayer and faith teach us that true strength doesn't come from within but from God. He gives us courage, wisdom, and the ability to face any situation. But Daniel's prayer journey isn't the end. It leads us to reflect on how a life of faith and dependence on God can impact the world around us, pointing to the need to trust in his sovereignty. This seamlessly connects to the next topic about the lessons of hope Daniel left us. Daniel's legacy is a powerful testimony of hope and spiritual resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. He lived as an exile, navigating cultural and political adversities, yet remained steadfast in his faith in every circumstance. His example shows us that true strength comes from unwavering trust in God, no matter what's happening around us. How often do we let difficulties weigh us down? Daniel inspires us to keep our eyes fixed on what is eternal. Daniel's hope wasn't based on some vague expectation that things would just get better. Instead, it was deeply rooted in the certainty that God was in control, even in the darkest moments. He knew that Babylon, no matter how powerful it seemed, wasn't greater than the God he served. This perspective reminds us that no matter how big our problems are, God is always bigger. How can you shift your perspective to see beyond the immediate difficulties? One of Daniel's greatest acts of resilience was his ability to thrive in a hostile environment without compromising his faith. He didn't just survive exile, he flourished, influencing kings and empires. This teaches us that we don't have to wait for perfect conditions to remain faithful or make an impact. Think about how you can bring light to the tough situations you're facing, whether at work, in your family, or in your community. Daniel also left us a powerful lesson in patience. He spent decades in a foreign land, often facing opposition and challenges, yet he never lost faith. He trusted that God had a plan, even when the results weren't immediate. This kind of patience is something we can all learn from. Are we willing to trust God while we wait for his promises to be fulfilled? Maybe what we need isn't just patience, but a faith that sustains it. Daniel's spiritual resilience was deeply rooted in his prayer life. He knew that true strength came from his relationship with God. Even as external pressures mounted, he never abandoned his spiritual habits. This shows us that resilience isn't built overnight. It's the result of consistent spiritual discipline. How can you strengthen your prayer life and devotion to face challenges with greater courage? Another remarkable aspect of Daniel's Legacy is his ability to keep hope alive, even when everything around him seemed to be falling apart. He understood that God was working behind the scenes, even when circumstances suggested otherwise. This challenges us to hold on to hope, even in times of uncertainty. Is there something in your life that feels impossible? Remember that God is always working for the good of those who love him. Daniel's life is also a testament to how our faith can impact others. From Nebuchadnezzar to Darius, the kings around him were profoundly influenced by his faith and character. This teaches us that our testimony can be a powerful tool for drawing others closer to God. How can you be an example of faith and hope to those around you? Daniel shows us that hope is something we can cultivate in the midst of adversity. He didn't wait for ideal conditions to trust God or live out his faith. Instead, he saw every challenge as an opportunity to demonstrate God's greatness. This challenges us to view problems as platforms to glorify God rather than insurmountable obstacles. What challenge are you facing right now? How can you use it to show your trust in God? Daniel's legacy is especially relevant today as we face economic, social, and spiritual uncertainties. His life reminds us that true hope doesn't come from external circumstances, but from a deep relationship with God. He shows us that no matter what the future holds, we can rest assured that God is in control. This gives us the strength to move forward, even when the road ahead looks tough. Finally, Daniel's life leaves us with a crucial question. Are we living with the same hope and spiritual resilience that he demonstrated? His example challenges us to examine our own lives and seek a deeper connection with God. As we reflect on the impact of his story, we're invited to ask ourselves, how can we live in a way that leaves a legacy of faith, hope, and courage for future generations? And with that, we conclude this journey with a call to put these lessons into action, living with the same determination and purpose that defined Daniel's life. Now that you've dived deep into the stories, challenges, and contexts that shaped Daniel's journey, his faith and God's sovereignty, the question is, how are you going to apply all of this in your life? Daniel wasn't just an example of courage and integrity. He was living proof that God honors those who remain faithful even in the face of adversity. Take a moment to reflect. Are you living with the same trust, prayer, and resilience that Daniel demonstrated? Maybe it's time to reset your priorities, dedicate more time to prayer, and trust that God has a greater purpose for your life. Are you willing to rely on him, even when the outcomes aren't clear yet? What if you had the same courage to face challenges with faith and use your gifts to glorify God? Remember, small actions can have a huge impact. Why not start today? Be a positive influence. Strive for excellence in everything you do and keep your eyes fixed on God's kingdom. If you enjoyed this content and want to keep learning, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, you'll find more content like this, packed with knowledge and reflection to help you grow spiritually and tackle life's challenges. And don't forget, there are already other videos popping up on your screen right now, so go ahead and dive even deeper into this journey of learning.